I'd like to invite Dr. Janaka Vijayasundara, President, Institute of Urban Designers, Sri Lanka, to introduce the topic.
Thank you, Sumudu, and it's a very good afternoon or evening to all of you, and also to James and maybe a few others, it's good morning. And on behalf of the Institute of Urban Designers, members, as well as the Council, I welcome all of you to the third seminar or webinar on urban design. This is conducted jointly with the Center for Cities, University of Moratuwa, Sri Lanka, by the Institute of Urban Designers. So I try to just go through a few slides as a start. Perhaps James will highlight, of course, in a different way. As you know, that this is a continuation of the previous month session. We talk about the urban design in the macro scale across the country. And so today's speech is about the Toronto as the major city in Canada to know about or to talk about the urban design. So I just show you a few slides also are not here before last time. Canada is one of the sort of largest countries, second largest, and Toronto is located in southern Ontario province. So it has I think 10 provinces and 3 territories. The northern part is administrative units are called territories, where Toronto is in Ontario province. So as you see here, the population is basically scattered around the southern part of Canada, where you can see with the dense of the colors, the Toronto, and along the southern Ontario and also Quebec, you get the largest population in Canada. So here again, you are looking at province of Ontario. It has southern and northern, and southern Ontario is the most populated. As I remember, it was around say 7 or 8 million population seems to be. And also what is interesting here for the planners is that how they try to control the built areas in the province, particularly these pink color areas called Golden Horseshoe development area, where along the Lake Ontario, it is a horseshoe shape area, and where these urban densities are located. And green area is the, this was proposed some time back, about, I think, about again 18, 20 years back. I remember that it was a discussion at that time by the planners. It's a green belt. So in order to make sure that the environment is protected without expanding the city built areas into across the province, and also you can see that later added with the Oak Ridge Marine area. It is a conservation area, and also Niagara escarpment area. So this is how the built form is to be controlled across the province. And these cities are connected mostly by the government of Ontario Railway, and it is somewhat. I mean, there are issues in terms of, as far as I know, that the connectivity, but it is growing. And also, you can see that the growing centers and also keeping the green areas untouched, in the sense that they actually, there's farmland and also these large plots of lands with green spaces and so on. So the forest and river edges and so on. So coming to the, I think this will be explained by James. This is the Toronto, Greater Toronto area, where you have 4 municipalities and City of Toronto, where after I had some work experience with James and his department, and I moved to Clarington, which is the eastern edge of the Greater Toronto area under the Durham region. So regional government is there, then the municipal government is under there. So coming to the Toronto 1998, it has been sort of connected with the outside town centers or urban centers, altogether 6 areas, and coming as the city of Toronto. So you can see that all Toronto and also what's something that I found actually interesting with the old maps showing that how Toronto streets were designed as urban, in terms of urban design aspect, that where the red and different colors are for the textures of the streets. Reds are brick and blue asphalt and asphalt blocks and so on. So something, very densely put with the street network well divided there. So in terms of the city transformation, you can see 1930, the lower left photo where the skyline, and onto the right side, 1941, within 11 years or so, that the city got developed into a unique place with a lot of high rises at that time. So you can imagine at that time how city. But now these few photos, but I think, and here I like to remind actually the time that I was with James and his colleagues at 19th floor, where the urban design department is located. This was a unique design, it's like an eye concept where everybody is looking at the council chambers at the middle. And it was said that steam was rejected at the very first. So it's Viljo Ravel. And then actually it has been recommended by Eero Saarinen, one of the known architects for most of us, old architects, and then got developed. It's one of the best places, landmarks in the city. Here you can see that how these different clusters are being developed. I think James is going to highlight all these areas, not all, but some of these areas, key areas. And you can see that adjoining previous town centers, for example, Mississauga and Pickering and Vaughan and Markham and all, like these are centers that got developed. And you can see that a clear expansion of the town with even, say, I'm not quite sure that maybe around 50 or 100 stories buildings in these areas where you can see the Toronto city far away. In between that, basically it's a flat kind of development where residences are located, as well as some green areas. So I'm not going to touch on these problems and so on, but I think more than that, it's more initiations are going to be discussed or presented by the James. So the program today is like that. So we have about 50 minutes for James to present his speech, and then we have about another 45 minutes for the discussion, starting with moderators first, and then the questions. So any comments are accepted through the text way of texting. And I must thank to the my colleague architect James Parak for accepting this invitation, and I'm sure that he's doing a lot of impact into the urban scape in Toronto, mediating into different parts of the, because it's so much difficult to get something implemented, as far as I understood with my experience with the developers that who are coming with multi-billion developers and trying to see something that how we can get their works done according to our thing. And also I thank to planner Professor Angajeeva Ratnayaka from University of Moratuwa, Department of Town and Country Planning, for accepting and coming as a moderator, and as well as architect Rehan Tilakaratna. I hope that he is actually a little far from here in Colombo, in an outskirt area. There seems to be problems with the signal. I hope that he might come or connected soon. So thank you, and then we can start. Sumudhu, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much, President IODSL Architect Plan Dr. Janak Vijayasundara for presenting the theme today. The topic is Urban Design in Toronto, Current Initiations. Our keynote speaker, Architect Urban Designer James Paraka, Manager, Urban Design City of Toronto. We warmly welcome you, sir. James Paraka is an award-winning architect who leads the urban design studio for Toronto and East York District of the City of Toronto's Planning Division. James is highly regarded as an international authority in the field of tall buildings urban design through his role as chair of the CTBUH Urban Habitat Urban Design Committee, a role that he has had since 2014. In his role as CTBUH UHUD Committee Chair, James has written several research papers on tall building urbanism, as well as being a principal author of two CTBUH technical guides, The Space Between and The Space Within the Tall Buildings. No other city in North America has experienced as much tall building construction as Toronto has over the last decade and a half. During this time, James has lead the urban design studio that has helped guide the review of development in downtown Toronto and surrounding urban areas. A portfolio that includes well over 300 tall buildings ranging in heights from 15 stories to over 95 stories. James is also vice chair of the design review panel for Canada's capital city of Ottawa and also serves on design panels for the National Capital Commission, NCC. James is also frequently invited to participate on or chair international design juries for tall building design for both and CTBUH as well as for WAM, World Architecture News Awards. Prior to joining the city, James was a lead designer with WZMH Architects Toronto, where he oversaw the design for projects in Canada, China, and the United Arab Emirates. Among the projects he was the lead designer of included the IGN Bank headquarters in Toronto, Park Island in the Dubai Marina, UAE, Etisalat headquarters in Sharjah and Fujah, UAE, and Shanghai Pudong Development Bank Tower in Pudong, PRC. James' main interests are in how tall buildings fit within their urban context, including a greater understanding of the role of a tall building on a city's skyline, as well as how tall buildings meet the streetscape. James is also very much interested in quality of life issues and how tall buildings affect the quality of life of people that live, work within them. Issues such as how tall buildings affect the people, realm, and space created in between tall buildings. James hold a Bachelor of Technology in Architecture degree from Ryerson University in Toronto, a Master of Architecture degree from Gerald D. Himes College of Architecture at the University of Houston, and a Master of Science in Urban Design degree from Columbia University in New York. So I cordially invite architect James Park to continue his speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sumudu, for that introduction. And thank you, Dr. Vijayasudra, for inviting me to speak today. I'm very excited to be here. Janaka, can I share my screen?
Sure, you can go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can see the slides.
Great, good. I'm just trying to see if I can go full screen.
Yeah, go down to the bottom area, somewhere close to the right side. Yes. Bottom right slide.
Great.
Yes.
Perfect. We're all set. So very pleased to be able to speak to you today about largely about the work that we are doing in the city of Toronto, as Dr. Vijayasudra said, the Canada's largest city, and a city that is outpacing all others in North America for growth in tall buildings. So that will be much of the focus of my conversation and discussion with you today. And I think it'll be interesting for you to understand how we plan and allow for tall buildings in the city. But beyond that, of course, I'm going to speak about the city structure, some of the things that Janaka started to speak about. Just by comparison, you will see that in many of the slides I am presenting today, our landmark CN Tower, which you see on the left-hand side, will be prevalent. And much like in Colombo, the Lotus Tower has become a landmark, of course, for your city. So just some comparables, you can see that we're all both dealing with tall buildings, just an elevation skyline comparison on the left of Toronto compared to some of the newer projects that you are seeing in Colombo, including, quite interestingly, both of our cities have a landmark project called The One. And so the one in Toronto is the image on the lower left, and the one in Colombo is the image in the middle on the lower. Both of us, of course, are dealing with international architects, including your Altair project, which is on the lower right by Moshe Safdie. And of course, we also have a built building in the middle on the bottom by Moshe Safdie. So we're working with the same number of international architects. And I often find it interesting to see how these projects are marketed, and it kind of tends to bring the world together in a way that you could see the commonalities. So on the right-hand side, a series of images of buildings that are being marketed in Colombo, and on the left, the same ideas, marketing of tall buildings in the city of Toronto. Amenities like swimming pools, health clubs, capitalizing on the view are all commonalities that we see in both cities. And in fact, we see them around the world. So just to give you a snapshot of what I'll be discussing today, this was the skyline of the city of Toronto. Around, Janaka, you came a few years after that. And you could see this is our 3D model of the city. You could see the CN Tower in the middle. This is it today. So you could see the change, right? The drastic change that we have experienced over the past 2 decades. And how do we accommodate this level of growth in the downtown, but still maintain a high quality of life? That's very much part of my challenge. And we are somewhat fortunate in Toronto to be frequently ranked one of the top cities in the world for livability. So the mayor has always challenged us. How do we continue that, and how do we make sure that our quality of life is high in standard 20 years from now, 25 years from now? And what moves are we making today that are going to have that type of impact in the future? So that's always something that is in the back of our minds in terms of how we plan a city. So by way of introduction, we are about 14,000 kilometers west and somewhat north of University of Moratuwa. And as Janaka has mentioned, we are on the north shores of Lake Ontario. And just for scale, the golden horseshoe that Dr. Wijasundar has mentioned is those regions that you see on this map, starting with Niagara Falls on the bottom and Buffalo, New York, in the United States. I can look out my window on a clear day and I look out at the lake, and across the lake, I can actually see the United States. So it shows you the scale. It's about an hour and a half drive from Toronto to Niagara Falls on the bottom of this image, which of course many of you are quite familiar with because it's one of our seven world wonders of the world, and of course a tourist attraction that I'm sure most of you have heard about, Niagara Falls. So as we zoom in now to the north side of Lake Ontario, and again touched upon by Janaka, you can see the regions of which we are targeting growth through our official plan. So for the planners that are hearing today, the official plan, of course, is the document that guides growth in the city of Toronto. So a concurrent map that you see here is that official plan map that we have. So the orange areas is the downtown. And the red areas are where we are targeting growth. So you can see there are 4 areas. Geographically in the middle of the city is Yonge and Eglinton, and then Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke. Scarborough is in the east, and beyond that is Clarington, where Janaka had many years of experience working there as well. But this just shows you how we are targeting growth. So in addition to this, you do see those sort of olive green linear areas. These are the areas where we are targeting for growth in the form of mid-rise buildings. So 6, 8, 10-story mid-rise buildings to line our avenue and to connect some of these major centers as well. So as you heard, we have a very extensive commuter rail line, which you see on the top 2 images, through GO train, or Government of Ontario train. And this is something that brings people to Union Station, the main central station in the city. And this is something that is continuing to grow and increase. On the bottom is our subway transit map, which, I would certainly say that it is something that we are working on extending. I think it is not adequate for the size of city that we are, 3 million people, only having the few subway lines right now. There are lines in the works. One will be completed next year, hopefully. And there'll be many others that are also planned but have not started construction yet. So you can see the issues that we deal with on the lower left in terms of the congestion that we have on our subway systems. And of course, as the downtown grows and as more people try to come into the downtown, that is, of course, only going to create more congestion from those people that are boarding the local subway transit lines. So I mentioned those other centers. This is not the downtown, but you could see that these are what those centers look like about 10 years ago. Why don't you focus on the upper left image? Yonge Eglinton, this is, of course, the center of the geographic center of the city, and this is it today. So again, you can see the growth and change that we have in these areas, and how do we compensate for that with new schools, new parks, new community centers, new daycares, new senior centers. All of those things are something that we have to be quite mindful of as we plan the city and as we accommodate this type of growth within the downtown. So just some aerial images of these skylines, as you can see on the upper right. Looking down, you can see the distance between North York to downtown Toronto, where again, you see that CN Tower in the distance. But these skylines in and of themselves, would outpace many of the skylines of other cities, for example, in Canada. So they're kind of like mini downtowns, if you will, and each one of them has to be thought of as that. And then whilst, of course, we are trying to accommodate and expand transit infrastructure in all of these areas as well, and just some images that you see. So the upper left is the Yonge Eglinton Crosstown Rail, which I made reference to, which should be opening up in about a year or so. But it is something that is nearing completion. Some of the tracks are being tested already with the light rail transit, which will run below ground mainly through much of the city, and then above ground at the eastern and western edges. And here's just some of the images that we are working on. Again, these are not downtown, but outside of the downtown. And some of the development that we're seeing there, including image on the lower left, the new Civic Center by Henning Larsson, an image on the upper left, which Dr. Vijay Sandra might recall because he assisted in this plan in Yonge and Eglinton. And I'm going to come back to this one in detail because it's current and active even today. So again, the official plan map showing those areas, and you can see now coming to the downtown, you know, the number of projects that we are dealing with today. And I mentioned always balancing growth with quality of life. So whilst a lot of these renderings are quite fantastic, you know, we have to think about the toolkit that we use to plan. So again, for the planners that are listening, we have a sort of provincial policy, which is the policy of the province of Ontario, through things like Places to Grow Act, the Green Belt that you heard about earlier, that is sort of limiting the growth and expansion of the farmland, which is a good thing. Our urban structure policies, land use policies, secondary plans, and zoning bylaws. So those are the documents which we use. In addition to that, we have urban design guidelines. Tall building, mid-rise, which I spoke about on those avenues. And we also recently developed a low-rise apartment and townhouse guidelines that you see on the right-hand side. And I'll touch upon these a little bit more, but they govern different things in terms of trying to protect quality of life, like how big tower floor plates should be, how far apart towers should be spaced, what type of sky view do we see through towers, and impact. So like many cities, of course, we have our landmark buildings, right? Daniel Libeskind's Royal Ontario Museum, the Ontario College of Art by Will Alsop, the tabletop, the ROM, the Art Gallery of Ontario, the AGO by Frank Gehry. Snøhetta designed this building for Ryerson University, where I did my undergraduate, the new Student Learning Center. And we also try to focus on how projects land and meet the street by asking for larger scale elevations of the first few floors. We call this our 1 to 50 program, which we did receive some recognition from the Ontario Association of Architects for putting this program in place. And it simply asks for and submits at site plan stage larger scale details of the first 4 or 5 floors of a building, because that is what the pedestrian experiences most when they're walking on our streets. So here's just some examples, the drawing on the top of a proposal, and the built building on the right. So you can see even the materials are labeled so that we can make sure that what we approve from a planning perspective does get built and doesn't get cheapened or value engineered as one goes through construction. So there is an obligation for the developer to make sure that they build what they promise that they will build. Again, our Shangri-La Hotel, which incorporates a heritage building you see on the upper image on the left-hand side. But some of the images that follow up on the drawing that we receive, you know, where limestone is, where granite is, where glass is, even the mullions we can start to secure in terms of what the appearance, the overall appearance of the building will be. And then most importantly as well, you know, one of the things I'm quite proud of is our POPS initiative. POPS stands for privately owned, publicly accessible space. So these are not parks, but these are things that we secure through the planning process that become publicly accessible spaces so that the public can actually engage and are invited to these spaces. And we've added well over 2 million square feet in the past decade alone of these sorts of spaces. So you can appreciate, again, when we're thinking about quality of life, you can appreciate how it is important to balance growth and development, but also greenery and open space as we plan and think about the downtown. So this is just the logo, and we have in all of our POPs now, we have a plaque which has this logo, which is comes from the coat of arms of the City of Toronto, which is called the alder tree, and the tagline, creative placemaking to enhance urban life. So this is on a plaque now that's in every one of these spaces, so the public knows they are welcome to come and enjoy these spaces. So just a variety of these spaces. You know, these are spaces that often accommodate public art, like this one by Iraqi artist Maha Mustafa. The red image that you see, the red artwork there. Some of the whimsical things that we see with our downtown urban spaces, these statues of cows that people like to linger around. This is a space that, you know, I think is quite important. It's a central space in downtown Toronto. But look at the trees. This is when the open space was just created. And then 3 years after, these are those same trees. So you can see the value of enhancement to greenery, oxygen, quality of life, you know, just by this initiative. You know, there's places to sit, and the landscape is something that, you know, we think is quite important. Places to cool off on a hot summer day. You know, this is a spot that has become popular because if you could see the queue and the lineup on the left-hand side, a new ice cream shop opened. So there are lineups, especially in the summertime, as you could see on the left-hand side, of people wanting to get ice cream, but they sit on the rocks and the hardscape and the fountains, and it's actually quite delightful. Major master plans that we are working on as well. So this is east of the downtown. This is East Harbor. We refer to this, and I think that there might be a guest on the call from London. So we refer to this as our Canary Wharf, which is of course a satellite downtown based on transit. So a major transit hub is being proposed in the middle of this, which is one major transit stop east of the downtown. The lake, of course, in Toronto is always south. And it didn't start out that way, right? So the original plan was by a world famous architect, I won't mention who, and proposed this idea of this spiraling concept of arrangement of buildings surrounding a park. And it's something that was quite foreign. In fact, you know, Janaka mentioned the street grid of the city of Toronto, and you can see that street grid here. You can immediately see that curvilinear form that I showed right in the middle of this slide. It was somewhat foreign, and even worse than that, it seemed to turn its back on the rest of the city. It said, we're creating this wall to focus on this park, but we don't really care what's behind us or outside of us. And we did think that we needed to rework that plan. So the revised plan, of course, follows the street grid. It has a series of urban squares. The building on the right is a renovated heritage warehouse building with an addition on top, connected to transit. Both those two lines that I spoke about, the GO and the local transit lines, will have stops here. But this will be a vibrant urban office node in the downtown, which will accommodate new shops and new places to work. So I'm going to go through a number of case studies because we think it would be interesting for you to understand how we plan and how we use urban design to frame and change developments from when they are first applied for to their final approval. So this is a project which was originally proposed north of our CN Tower and our major stadium downtown, where the Toronto Blue Jays baseball team plays. The original proposal called for a 60-story tower on John Street, which was one of our major culture corridors. And you know, we thought that it was actually not that appropriate to line a major corner with a tall building that comes straight down to the ground. Think about the wind impacts. You know, tall buildings come with wind impacts that would create. Also across the street from here was an existing city park. So we did this sketch on the right-hand side that said, why don't you move the tower? The existing city park is in the foreground on the image on the right-hand side. And we can add a pop space on your site right on the corner. So that is, of course, now some of the renderings that were starting to be developed by the developer. And you can see on the left-hand side that pop space combined with the city park that you see on the bottom. And that's a rendering of that space. And you can see that space now looking down from, now you're on the CN Tower, and you're looking down and you could see the green star marking that space not only, and you could see the city park that was already existing. And you could see how now the two combined with the buildings frame this urban room that really has become much more of a gateway, we think, rather than putting a tall building right at the corner. And you can see some of the images. So one of the things, some of the details, there's public art in this space, there's greenery, there's these dog stations that you see. You know, we have a lot of dog population, and we just wrote guidelines about pet-friendly buildings. So places that you can walk your dog, but also you can discard things if you need to discard things. And then at night, right, thinking about lighting and thinking about safety and benches. And you could see this image was taken about 10 p.m. and people are still using the space and it feels very safe. So that's, of course, important as well. Then we're dealing with, now you see the yellow star, we're now dealing with a major application on this site, which is unanticipated at the time. But we still wanted to maintain the park zone that we have where the yellow star is. And this is a new proposal by Cesar Pele, Clark Pele Architects, fantastic design that you see here. Landmark 2 towers and 2 residential towers, 2 office, 2 residential, and a large deck park over a railway corridor. So quite impressive from an infrastructure point of view. Our stadium that you see does have a retractable roof so that it's open, actually the world's first major stadium that has that. So it's open during baseball games in the summertime, but of course it can be closed as well. And then here's the new park that is being proposed and how the new office buildings will frame it with retail, shops, animation, and how that park will actually gradually rise up to a terrace that will actually occupy a new park, which is built over railway corridors. So quite sophisticated from an engineering perspective as well. But you can see how these sorts of spaces tend to animate the public realm. So a project that Janaka and I, Dr. Vijayasandra and I were just talking about, and one that he was involved with. You see he's standing up and sitting up with interest. This is a project that we both worked on together, the Ritz-Carlton and the RBC Towers when he was in Toronto. This is the RBC Towers and the Ritz under construction on the right-hand side of this image. And the Ritz when it's completed. Now, it didn't start out that way. And as Janaka remembers, it was a 3-tower scheme at that time. And we were both concerned about how being on the south side of a park, how this would create continuous shadows on that park. So we said, well, why don't we go taller? So go from 3 towers to 2, space them apart further, but then go taller. So that is the built work that I showed you. And you can see in our 3D plan what those 2 towers look like. Now, these towers were between 2 parks. So it was important, we thought, we don't need another park here, but we do need strong visual pedestrian connections connecting these 2 parks, which is the green arrow that you're seeing there. So in plan, you could see those green arrows in terms of these pedestrian walkways connecting the park, which is on the north upper side of this slide, to Simcoe Park that you see here. And then we studied it, right? We did drawings, you know, will the space get light? Can we put trees there? Should we have benches? So we studied these spaces to make sure that they would work in their proportion. This is a hand sketch at the time. And the built connection. So again, you know, important not as a space that you really stop at, although you can, but important as a pedestrian connection and increasing walkability in our city. And then here again is that space on the right-hand side of this slide. So I'm going back now to that same view from the CN Tower looking down, and you could see those green arrows now on the right-hand side and how they enhance walkability. So in this one slide alone and on this one block, you could see the value of the work that we do, right? You can imagine if there wasn't that green park where the green star is, if there wasn't those walkways on the right, if there wasn't that urban room, these are the things that we created through the planning process. I want to talk a little bit about heritage and heritage conservation. You know, we in the city are a young city, so we don't have a lot of heritage buildings by comparison to European standards, for example. But what we do have, we want to celebrate and commemorate. So this is a project that has been built. It's the Four Seasons Hotel in Midtown or Yorkville area of the city. And we wrote guidelines, as I referred to. Some of those guidelines are based on typology, but others are based on geographic areas. So this is in Yorkville. And we did these guidelines long before we got applications. And you could see the hand sketch that was done of the old clock tower of the fire hall. And this has become the local landmark of the area. We wanted to make sure that even before we got development, we frame and set back buildings so that we can maintain views to these local landmarks. So that heritage building is in the middle of this slide, and it was something that we wanted to be framed by open space on both sides. So the Four Seasons is on the left-hand side of this image. And you can see its rendering here. The landscape was actually inspired by the Victorian architecture at the time, which is actually quite interesting. And the rose garden that you see was the motif that was used by the landscape architect. So here was the picture before, and you could see how there was a car dealership, and people would actually go into the fire hall clock tower and disturb the firemen and say, "Where are the cars?" Because you see the sign says showroom entrance right outside the fire hall clock tower. But this is it today. So the western edge now is opened up with a new park where you can actually see the clock tower, just like our guidelines proposed it from the west. And you can see now the clock tower here, places to sit, and you can see it at night again. Again, thinking about illumination at night, public art, which you see illuminated in the middle of this slide, with this misting fountain, which is actually quite magical. You can see the artwork and you can see the misting fountain with the lights. It's something that has created an attraction. Every hour on the hour, the water will mist and the lights will come on and people will come there, and it's actually quite a bit of a spectacle. And how movable chairs and tables are things that help animate that space. We didn't stop there, thinking about the importance of that clock tower. So we did a master plan study or a block plan study, and you can see in the center of this kind of an Noli plan that we refer to the arrow, which is talking about now the views to that fire hall from the south. So this was it a few years ago, and you can see in the middle, peeking out, I call this our peekaboo slide, you could see that clock tower down this alleyway. We said, wouldn't it be nice if this turned into this? This is a sketch, hand sketch that we did, city planning did, to entice a developer to create this walkway and open space. And so this actually straddled two property lines. So the first developer that came along provided this walkway, framing and proposing now views to this clock tower. And you could see it in plan with the clock tower to the left. And you could see the gray area was not part of the first proposal. And an image of that wider portion of the public realm. We didn't stop there. We said to the next developer who was coming in to the right, why don't you expand that walkway into another urban park, framing, as you can see, the old fire hall and the Victorian library. So now you can see the wider park that is now approved. And you can see at the right-hand side, that clock tower. And then looking back from the steps of the clock tower, how this new urban space will become the focal point for this block and for this neighborhood. So again, it's important to think about all of these spaces and how they work together. And then under construction right now in the center of the slide, you could see that Victorian fire hall clock tower and library to the right. So it's happening, which is exciting for us. Creating parkland, we have a parkland dedication system where we do require a certain percentage of any block to be offered as parkland. And that's important. This is on Bay Street, so a major financial center and financial street in the city of Toronto. And you can see in the middle, the historic church. And we received the first proposal from the architect, which was 3 towers, lined and framed, surrounded by this 6-story stone wall. And what we said is, well, we can't see the church anymore. There's no open space. I think we need to go to the drawing board. We did these massing studies using our 3D model to suggest consolidating development on one side of the site, going taller again and going from 3 towers to 2, and getting rid of this long stone wall and replacing it with a park, a 1-acre park. So rendering of the approved proposal on the left, now finished building on the right, and you can see the enhancement of that open space and park. Part of it was already previously heavily planted, so you can imagine it would have been a shame to bring down all of those 100-year-old trees that you see in the foreground. Just the plan, showing the church now surrounded by landscape, and some images now of the recently completed open space. Has benches, bike rings, fountains, green lawn, other views. Now you can see the church is in full view. So these are the things that we think are really important, right? You know, thinking about those areas that make a place or a neighborhood or a block special, and capitalizing on that with development. And looking at, again, how that open space relates to, you know, major financial street. Also think about the value, right? This is Bay Street, a major financial street in the city of Toronto. What is the value of that 1 acre park right on Bay Street? So that's something that, you know, we have to be mindful of as well. Not that far away, so just a block away, another major development. So the location of the last park, which is called Clover Hill, is on the upper left, that green star that you see. And then a new 1.6 acre park, Dr. Lillian McGregor Park, is something that we negotiated through a series of developments consolidated on this block through a complicated formula of parkland dedication. And then some of the images of that park when it will be completed. And then working with the architect, Bruce Kubara, Janaka, you may remember that name, KPMG. We wanted to make sure we positioned the tower so that we could still have a strong diagonal view through. So that this way the tower, which was part of the reason why we got this park, did not occupy too much of that park, and it was positioned in such a way that you could see from one side to the other. So that tower is now complete. And the park is under construction, as you can see here, and you can clearly see that diagonal view looking northwest from one side of the block to the other. Many of you may have heard of an architect by the name of Frank Gehry, probably one of the most famous architects that is living today. And we've been working with him now for quite a few years on a number of proposals for King Street. First was a 3-tower proposal. That when it met the street, it actually took away a number of heritage buildings and an important theater, Princess of Wales Theater, named after Princess Diana. And whilst it would have been fantastic, it wasn't us, right? It wasn't Toronto, and we thought that the compromises of losing the heritage building were too great. Also, the 3 towers would have created a wall, which would have cast shadows. You know, these were towers that were approaching 100 stories. A revised proposal, 2 towers, keeping a lot of the heritage that was in place and integrating it into the development. And you can see now the streetscape of how the Princess of Wales Theatre on the left, many of the heritage buildings and the Royal Alec Theatre on the right were maintained. And then how these 2 buildings now will frame a potential new civic space in between. So that was the proposal on the left. They have been continuing to work with this proposal, and you can see now the most recent studies that were done to refine the massing by Frank Gehry. And, you know, he works heavily in models, even today, which is actually quite refreshing. And the most recent proposal. This is just north, Dr. Vijayasandra, of the Ritz-Carlton and the RBC that you had worked on when you were in the city of Toronto. A project that is still working today, St. Clair and Alvin. So Yonge Street is our major north-south street. And you can see how it bends where the label of sight is. And this is considered, many people still refer to this as the longest street in the world. It goes all the way up to Hudson's Bay in a variety of forms. We worked on a proposal many years ago for the site where the red star is. 2 towers, and the lesson here is to transition to a neighborhood. So 2 towers of equal height. Of course, as we know, towers have shadows. 2 towers have double the shadows at certain points of time. So we did this massing to try to transition the towers down to the neighborhood, which is to the right. So again, the subway is on the left, subway station. Neighborhood 1-story bungalows are on the right-hand side. So the lesson again is transitioning in height and scale down to the neighborhood. So this was the original proposal and the revised proposal. So the left tower got taller, the right tower got smaller, larger floor plate, and terracing down. So the view from the neighborhood before and then after. So 16 going down to 7, going down to 3-story scale. So transitioning heights down to the scale that relates better to a specific neighborhood. Also public realm. Not much public realm in the first proposal, much more so in the second proposal, particularly with respect to mid-block connections connecting major streets to the neighborhood. So this was a vacant lot that was part of the assembly. So this vacant lot on Yonge Street would become this, with fountains, seating. We even secured at the time where the pump room would be where the water wall was considered. And thinking about wintertime, right? Because, 6 months of the year, it is cold. As I mentioned at the start of this conversation, it's now -6. It was -7 when we started. So things are warming up. That's good. But that was 10 years ago and that project sat. And now we have another application on the same lands. So we are working with that. In fact, last night we just had another community meeting. Buildings now taller, the site is larger. Some of the transition that we're seeing now. So we're trying to learn the same lessons of how, as you come to the foreground, the buildings will get lower to transition to the south. And then in terms of the public realm, the original proposal on the right with that greenery that I showed you, but now we're actually working with a proposal that is offering much more greenery and much more porosity to the block. And then this is now a central courtyard. And you can see in the middle, it's actually framing the gable end of a church. So it's actually something that is developing quite well. So Janaka, how am I for time? I just wanted to pace myself.
I think you have about another 15 to 20 minutes.
Perfect, perfect. So I showed you that block, which is just on the left-hand side, but we're also working now with architect Jeannie Gang, right on the same neighborhood that I showed you before. Very famous Chicago architect. She originally proposed a building that looked like a pine cone. Pine cone, of course, falls from trees in Canada. And we thought, well, that's kind of interesting, but we do think that it's important to make sure that the building fits the context. So we thought that the idea of a pine cone was interesting, but it was somewhat foreign to the city. And also was taking away heritage buildings like this. And as you know, I remember I mentioned that we sort of value our heritage buildings. We want to retain them as much as we can. And this was actually a fine example of a heritage Art Deco building from the 1930s and 40s. So here, what we wanted to do was to make sure that the building was now parallel to the street. So no more this idea of a pine cone, but something that was framing the street in a perpendicular way, as our official plan policy says. But at the same time, the architect wanted to have that distinction, and we agreed, it was important to have that distinction. So the form here is actually quite complex. You could see on the left, starts with a square, but then ends up again with this circular form, and then how that is manifested with the balconies. I still look at this and I'm still confused at how they do it, but I think it's actually quite clever. And you can see that resolution, right? The before is on the left, the after is on the right, still have that distinction. And as I mentioned, this is where the street jogs. So this building does become a terminus for that street. And the rendering of the right, along with what was approved on the left, but now I showed you the new proposal that we have on the left. So Yonge and Eglinton, project that Dr. Vijayasundara spent a lot of time on a plan that we were working on at the time. And you can see here again, it's in the geographic center of the city. It's a large site occupying 2 now subway lines, right? One is the one that I mentioned that's being complete next year. So it's that red square right in the middle. And one of the things that both he and I, Janaka and I wanted to make sure is that we got a pedestrian connection from the neighborhood to Yonge Street. I'm sure, Janaka, you remember this, and your sketch I remember at the time quite vividly. So again, it's the red square from a very high area where we have 60-story buildings on the right, to single family homes again. So again, that lesson of transition and how we transition from this, the excitement and vitality and urban aspect of the area, to this, right, in one block, was something that was very much part of our challenge. And also this, right, not the type of thing that we as architects, urban designers aspire to. You know, vacant bus barns, spiraling garage ramps, not the nicest urban design elements of the city. So this is what we aspire to, right? Walkable streets, greenery, expanded transit. And we wrote these guidelines. And these guidelines were approved by council in 2009. We looked at a number of opportunities to lay out blocks, new streets, greenery, where towers go, where mid-rise buildings go. And we started to mass and study them in 3 dimensions and look at their shadow impacts. How will the shadows of these proposed heights work? Started to draft urban design guidelines very quickly in sketch form so that we can communicate very quickly the ideas to the community. For example, providing public amenities such as a linear park, and a quick sketch on the lower left. And then thinking about the guidelines that resulted in terms of how we're going to phase this major block, how we're going to access it in terms of making sure that the vehicles don't go into the neighborhoods. So the concept plan that we came up with, and I say we, it includes Dr. Vijay Sandru, is the original plan, and I'm sure Janaka remembers these, and the approved plan, showing that green connection that Janaka sketched out way back then.
Minto development. Minto.
That's right. Yeah, Minto, yes. Yeah, focusing on that Minto courtyard. So this is the hand sketch. It took 3 days to do this sketch, but we got a lot of mileage from it. So that this image will become this. This image, that Minto courtyard, that oval space that you see on the left image on the bottom, will actually be opened up to a view corridor, so that this bunker of a building would become something like this: new pedestrian concourses, access to transit, looking back, and then renderings of what the park could look like, and how we transition to that neighborhood. So the bungalows you see on the right-hand side would be transitioned to townhouses on the left-hand side. Front doors facing the street so that people have neighbors facing neighbors. So this is actually what got built in the first phase. So again, you could see our rendering and the actual built proposal that is built. You know, again, those townhouses, scale of the neighborhood is maintained. And then our rendering of what was before and what was proposed. So townhouses going up to a higher mid-rise scale, going up to the towers, and a new park. So this is the only piece at that time since then that has been developed. And you could see the sketch, and you could see the Google Earth view of the aerial, and you could see that piece has been developed. Now 10 years have gone by, and we have now another proposal. That was what was built. Another proposal for something much different, but similar, right? Carrying on what we say, the DNA of that plan. This is by Cesar Pelle, Clark Pelle, and Hariri Pontarini. Now towers much higher than what was anticipated at the time, but a greenery that has been expanded as well, but keeping the bones of our plan. So the road that we had secured, the park that we had secured, and also that pedestrian connection through to Yonge Street was all the things that we thought was important in that plan. And now you can see the widened pedestrian concourse than what we had anticipated at that time, and the views of how these streets will line the street. Just a couple more projects, working with Renzo Piano on a new courthouse. And this is right behind City Hall. So the landmark that Janaka introduced at the beginning was the City Hall, and you could see what he referred to as the eye of the city, right? Council chamber is the pupil, framed by these 2 curvilinear buildings. Janaka, at the time we were on the 19th floor. You were right at the on the right-hand side tower. We're now on the 11th floor. So we have moved recently. We've been going, up and down as they renovate floors. The star here is the site of the courthouse, working with Renzo Piano. And, since this City Hall is the landmark, you could see it's on the logo of all my slides on the bottom. The logo of the City of Toronto. We wanted to make sure that what was behind it did not take away from that impact of the City Hall. And those views of City Hall were something we were very mindful of, right? The building sits just to the left of City Hall in these images. So we started to mass different studies and different rote guidelines that you see on the left-hand side to make sure that we limit the height so it doesn't overwhelm City Hall. And then we started to sketch different ideas in terms of creating a building that had some rhythm. So it's not a floor plate that's much bigger than City Hall. And this is what has been approved and finalized, again, working with Renzo Piano out of his Paris office. Beautiful detail in terms of the skin, very simple. It's a detail, it's a curtain wall detail that I've never seen before, a spandrel that has an aluminum rib panel that changes color based on the texture and based on the time of day. It's actually quite fascinating. And you can see the rendering of how that will sit behind City Hall. And some of the public spaces, there's a plaza or forecourt that will use the same paving as City Hall to sort of extend the public realm, some of the interior spaces. And again, I mentioned the curtain wall was very important. So we actually went north of the city to look at the mock-ups that were being done at the time, how the corners were treated, etc. And now you could see that building under construction behind City Hall. We think it would contribute in such a way that would be an elegant landmark, but not overwhelm the City Hall. You could see now some of that curtain wall is just starting to go up. Just a couple more things I want to touch upon. You know, I mentioned today it is -6, which is good. It has been quite cold. So we do have this extensive system of underground networks called our path. And these are just some various spaces of that path system and how it has created this public realm that you can walk around. There's 30 kilometers connected in a climate controlled environment. So you don't have to go outside. And that's important during our cold winter weathers. And as we close, we come down to the lake. This is actually my neighborhood. This is 10 years ago, and this is what is built today. And I actually am, you know, if you can see my cursor, I'm actually right here. And you can see again, connecting the path, Union Station, which is that red arrow, and new development, like this is one by London architect Wilkinson Eyre that is just nearing completion, that will have a public realm or a park bridging over the railway corridors, and working with Richard Rogers' partnership on another fantastic office building, protecting heritage buildings and creating new atriums and open spaces. So you can see an old heritage building on the left-hand side of this image, and how the new proposal would actually set back from it, but create this interior forecourt that is this public realm that will celebrate that heritage. And then lastly, I want to touch upon a new square that we created called Maple Leaf Square, which is on the south side of our Union Station. So for the first time ever, we have a south entrance to Union Station. You see that our main central station, which will then come out into this civic square. And when we first created this square, we always thought, you know, it would be good for, you know, a couple hundred people. This was when Toronto hosted the Pan Am Games, and we unveiled the logo, and you can see there was this gathering of a couple of hundred people in this square. Didn't expect this. Tens of thousands of people that would gather in this square to look at a hockey game on a big screen, as you see here. And you can see the volumes of people, though we didn't anticipate this. You know, it was a type of thing. And of course, sometimes we lose, so the reactions are not that favorable. But you know, sometimes we win. Like our Raptors won the championship, the NBA basketball team 2 years ago. All of the celebrations occurred in this square. You could see again how this has become, you know, a vibrant place for We the North, as it's referred to. Just want to close by talking about, Sumudo mentioned my role as the chair of the Urban Habitat Committee for the Council on Tall Buildings, a non-for-profit organization based in Chicago and Shanghai. Deals with everything related to tall buildings, from elevators, mechanical systems, but also planning and urban design. And it's a multidisciplinary not-for-profit organization. It's a great learning experience. You can see the membership, about 38% of the membership is from North America, about 27% though is from Asia. So there's a growing group that are from Asia. There's conferences that are held every year. Unfortunately, last year it was canceled, but this year it's still being planned for Singapore in November. And they have an annual awards, and I've been on the jury for many of these awards over the past year. And then some of the publications, including two of the books that Sumudo mentioned that I have been the principal author on. But I also want to touch upon this. Every year I organize a global walk, and it's a walk that begins in Auckland on the same day and then goes to Sydney, Shanghai, Singapore, as it goes, Dubai, London to Toronto. So it's kind of like New Year's Eve, that we organize this walk with various groups and we look at different themes in terms of urban issues. So, this was the Toronto walk a few years ago, and, in Shanghai, in London. And we tweet about it. So using Twitter and the hashtag CTBUH, one can actually follow along these walks. So you could take part in the walk in Mumbai, for example, and you can see the walks in other parts of the city. So wouldn't it be great if Colombo joined this global walking tour this year? But maybe I'll touch base with Jonica afterwards, and maybe we could just talk about that. Looking at our winter scenery here in our nation's capital, streets of Ho Chi Minh City and how they're animated. So we learn a lot, right, from these walks, and we learn how public realm is animated. A certain walk one year went from the laneways of Melbourne, very famous laneways of Melbourne, to watching the sunset on the world's tallest building. So it's fascinating, right, as we watch people experience different things around the world. The Bund in Shanghai, spaces in Montreal, Canada, interior winter gardens, and the views from there. And then just in closing, again, the two publications. One is called The Space Between, urban spaces between tall buildings. And then the second one is The Space Within. I'm now working on my third book, which is going to be called The Space Below, which will deal with these pedestrian systems. So with that, thank you very much and look forward